Milan, the 5th of January 1992. How to travel with a salmon. According to the newspapers, there are two main problems besetting the modern world: the invasion of the computer and the alarming expansion of the third world. The newspapers are right, and I know it. My recent journey was brief: 1 day in Stockholm and 3 in London. In Stockholm, taking advantage of a free hour, I bought a smoked salmon, an enormous one, dirt cheap. It was carefully packaged in plastic, but I was told that, if I was traveling, I would be well advised to keep it refrigerated. Just try. Happily, in London, my publisher made me a reservation in a deluxe hotel, a room equipped with minibar. But on arriving at the hotel, I had the impression I was entering a foreign legation in Peking during the Boxer Rebellion. Whole families camping out in the lobby, travelers wrapped in blankets sleeping amid their luggage. I questioned the staff, all of them Indians except for a few Malayans, and I was told that just the previous day, in this grand hotel, a computerized system had been installed and, before all the kinks could be eliminated, had broken down for 2 hours. There was no way of telling which rooms were occupied and which were free. I would have to wait. Towards evening the system was back up, and I managed to get into my room. Worried about my salmon, I removed it from the suitcase and looked for the minibar. As a rule, in normal hotels, the minibar is a small refrigerator containing 2 beers, some miniature bottles of hard liquor, a few cans of fruit juice, and 2 packets of peanuts. In my hotel, the refrigerator was family size and contained 50 bottles of whiskey, gin, Drambuie, Cavassier, 8 large Perriers, 2 Vitellois, and 2 Evians, 3 half bottles of champagne, various cans of Guinness, pale ale, Dutch beer, German beer, bottles of white wine both French and Italian, and, besides peanuts, also cocktail crackers, almonds, chocolates, and Alka-Seltzer. There was no room for the salmon. I pulled out 2 roomy drawers of the dresser and emptied the contents of the bar into them, then refrigerated the salmon, and thought no more about it. The next day, when I came back into the room at 4 in the afternoon, the salmon was on the desk, and the bar was again crammed almost solid with gourmet products. I opened the drawers, only to discover that everything I had hidden there the day before was still in place. I called the desk and told the clerk to inform the chambermaids that if they found the bar empty it wasn't because I had consumed all its contents, but because of the salmon. He replied that all such requests had to be entered in the central computer, but, a further complication, because most of the staff spoke no English, verbal instructions were not accepted. Everything had to be translated into basic. Meanwhile, I pulled out another 2 drawers and filled them with the new contents of the bar, where I then replaced my salmon. The next day at 4 p.m., the salmon was back on the desk, and it was already emanating a suspect odor. The bar was crammed with bottles large and small, and the 4 drawers of the dresser suggested the back room of a speakeasy at the height of Prohibition. I called the desk again and was told that they were having more trouble with the computer. I rang the bell for room service and tried to explain my situation to a youth with a ponytail. He could speak nothing but a dialect that, as an anthropologist colleague explained later, had been current only in Kafiristan at about the time Alexander the Great was wooing Roxana. The next morning I went down to sign the bill. It was astronomical. It indicated that in 2.5 days I had consumed several hectoliters of Veuve Clicquot, 10 liters of various whiskies, including some very rare single malts, 8 liters of gin, 25 liters of mineral water, both Perrier and Evian, plus some bottles of San Pellegrino, enough fruit juice to protect from scurvy all the children in UNICEF's care, and enough almonds, walnuts, and peanuts to induce vomiting in Dr. K. Scarpetta. I tried to explain, but the clerk, with a beetle-blackened smile, assured me that this was what the computer said. I asked for a lawyer, and they brought me an avocado. Now my publisher is furious and thinks I'm a chronic freeloader. The salmon is inedible. My children insist I cut down on my drinking. 1986. How to replace a driver's license. In May of 1981, as I was passing through Amsterdam, I lost my wallet, or it was stolen. There are thieves even in Holland. It contained only a small amount of money, but a number of documents and cards. I didn't become aware of the loss until, at the airport, about to leave the country, I realized my credit card was missing. In the half an hour remaining before takeoff I conducted a desperate search for a place to report the loss, or theft. Within 5 minutes I was received by an airport police sergeant who, in good English, explained that the matter was not within the airport's jurisdiction, as the wallet had been lost in the city. Nevertheless, he agreed to type out a report and assured me that, at 9, when the office opened, he would personally telephone American Express. And so, within 10 minutes, the Dutch part of my case was dealt with. Back in Milan, I telephone American Express and ascertain that my card number has been circulated worldwide, and the following day a new card arrives. What a great thing civilization is, I say to myself. Then I tally the other lost documents, and I make a report at the police station. Another 10 minutes. How wonderful, I say to myself. Our police are just like the Dutch. Among the lost items is my press card. I am able to obtain a duplicate in 3 days. Better and better. Alas, I have also lost my driver's license. But this seems the least of my worries. We live in a capital of the automobile industry. There's a Ford in our future. Our country's famous superhighways are the envy of the world. I call the Italian Automobile Club and am told that I have only to give them the number of the lost license. I realize I don't have it written down anywhere, except, of course, on the lost license itself, and I try to find out if they can look up my name in their files and find the number. Apparently this is impossible. I cannot live without driving. It's a life or death matter, and I decide to do what as a rule I don't do. Find a shortcut, use connections. As a rule, I say, I don't do this, because I dislike putting friends or acquaintances to any trouble, and I hate it when people use such tactics with me. And besides, I live in Milan, where, if you need a certificate from a city office, you don't have to call the mayor. It's quicker to join the line at the window, where they're fairly efficient. But the fact is, anything involving our car makes all of us a bit nervous, so I call Rome and speak with a highly placed person at the automobile club there, who puts me in touch with a highly placed person at the automobile club of Milan, who tells his secretary to do everything that can be done. Everything, in this case, unfortunately amounts to very little, despite the secretary's politeness. She teaches me a few tricks. She urges me to track down an old receipt from Avis or Hertz, where the number of my license should appear on the carbon copy. In one day she helps me fill out the preliminary forms, then she tells me where I have to go, namely the license office of the prefecture, an immense hall, teeming with a desperate and malodorous crowd, reminiscent of the station of New Delhi in the movies about the revolt of the sepoys. And here the postulants, telling horrible tales. I've been here since the first invasion of Libya, are encamped with thermoses and sandwiches, and when you reach the head of the line, as I personally discover, the window is closing. In any case, I have to admit, it adds up to a few days of standing in line, during which every time you reach the window you learn that you should have filled out a different form or should have bought a different denomination of tax stamp, and you are sent back to the end of the line. But, as everyone knows, this is the way things are. All is in order, I'm finally told. Come back in about 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I take taxis. 2 weeks later, after climbing over some postulants who have by now gone into irreversible coma, I discover at the window that the number I had copied from the Avis receipt, whether through an error at the source or through defective carbon paper or through deterioration of the ancient document, is not correct. Nothing can be done if you give them the wrong number. Very well, I say, you obviously can't look for a number that I'm unable to tell you, but you can look under eco and find the number. No, maybe it's ill will or stress, or maybe licenses are listed only by number. In any case, what I ask is beyond their capabilities. Try at the office where you first got the license, they say, the city of Alessandria, many years ago. There they should be able to reveal your number to you. I don't have time to go to Alessandria, especially now that I can't drive, so I fall back on a second shortcut. I telephone an old school friend, now a highly placed person in local financial circles, and ask him to telephone the city's Bureau of Motor Vehicles. He makes an equally dishonest decision and, instead, privately calls a highly placed person at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, who tells him that data of that sort cannot be given out, except to the police. I'm sure the reader will realize the risks the state would run if my license number were to be given out right and left. Gaddafi and the KGB would desire nothing more. So it must remain top secret. Another stroll down memory lane and I come up with another schoolmate, who is now a highly placed person in a division of the government, but I warn him immediately not to get in touch with any important officials of the Motor Vehicles Bureau, because the matter is dangerous and he could end up being summoned before a parliamentary investigating committee. My suggestion, on the contrary, is to find a lowly placed person, perhaps a night watchman, who can be bribed to take a peek at the files under cover of darkness. The highly placed person in government is lucky enough to find a medium-placed person at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, who doesn't even have to be bribed, because he is a regular reader of L'Espresso and decides, out of his devotion to culture, to risk this dangerous favor for his favorite columnist, me. I don't know exactly what feats this daring figure performs, but the fact is that, the following day, I have the number of the license. My readers will forgive me if I refuse to reveal it. I have a wife and children to consider. With this number, which I now copy down everywhere and conceal in secret drawers against the next theft or loss, I pass through other lines at the Milan license office. I wave it triumphantly before the suspicious eyes of the clerk, who, with a smile that has nothing human about it, tells me that I must also display the number of the document with which, in the far-off 1950s, the Alessandrian authorities communicated the number of my license to the authorities of Milan. More telephone calls to old schoolmates, and the hapless middle-rank figure, who had already run such risks, returns to the scene, commits several dozen additional crimes, purloins some information that, apparently, the police would give their lives for, and conveys to me the number of the document, which I also keep well hidden, because, as everyone is aware, even the walls have ears. I return to the Milan Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and with a few days of waiting in line, it's done. The fait is accompli. I am promised the magic document within about 2 weeks. By now it is late June, and finally I get my hands on a preliminary document stating that I have presented an application for the issuing of a license. Obviously there exists no form contemplating loss or theft, and the document is the kind that is issued to learners, before they are given a proper license. I show it to a traffic cop, asking him if it entitles me to drive, and the cop's expression depresses me. The good officer makes it clear that if he caught me behind the wheel with that piece of paper he'd make me rue the day I was born. In fact, I rue it, and I return to the license office, where, in a few days' time, I learn that the document issued me was, so to speak, only an aperitif. I am to wait for another document, one that will say that, having lost my license, I can drive until I receive the new one, because the authorities have ascertained that I previously possessed the old one. Which is precisely what everybody knows, from the Dutch police to the Italian authorities, and the license office also knows it, only they don't want to come right out and say so until they've given the matter some thought. Mind you, everything the office might wish to know is what it knows already, and no matter how much thought they give it, they'll never manage to know anything further. But that's life. Towards the end of June I make repeated return visits to inquire about the vicissitudes of promised document number 2, but its preparation apparently demands a great deal of work. I am ready to believe this. They ask me for so many documents and photographs that I can only conclude that this paper will be something like a passport, complete with watermark pages and seals and so on. At the end of June, having already spent mind-boggling amounts on taxis, I look for another shortcut. Look, I write for papers with national circulation. Perhaps someone could help me, on the pretext that I have to travel for reasons connected with the public weal. Thanks to 2 Milan offices of La Repubblica and L'Espresso, I managed to establish communication with the press office of the prefecture, where I find a kindly lady who expresses her willingness to look into my case. The kindly lady doesn't think for a moment of reaching for the phone. Bravely, she goes in person to the license office and breaches the sanctum from which the profane are excluded, advancing amid labyrinthine rows of dossiers, lying there since time immemorial. What the lady does, I don't know. I hear stifled screams and cascades of papers, clouds of dust blow from beneath the door. Finally, the lady reappears, holding in her hand a yellow form of tissue-like paper, the sort that parking attendants slip under your windshield wiper, 19 centimeters by 13. No photograph appears on it. It is written by hand, with some ink smears from nibs dipped into inkwells straight out of Dombey and Son, the sort filled with lees and mucilage, causing streaks on the porous sheet. There is my name, with the number of the vanished license, and some printed lines declaring that the present document replaces the above described license, but that it expires on December 29th. Date obviously chosen to catch the victim as he is maneuvering along the tortuous curves of some alpine locality, if possible in a blizzard, far from home, so he can be arrested and tortured by the highway police. The paper authorizes me to drive in Italy, but I suspect it would confuse a foreign policeman considerably if I were to display it outside the country. Oh, well, at least I'm driving again. To make this story shorter, I'll add that in December my license isn't ready. I encounter some resistance when I try to renew the temporary one. I fall back once more on the press office of the prefecture. I receive the temporary document back with, written in a crabbed hand, what I could have written myself, namely that it is renewed until the following June. Another date chosen to catch me out while I'm winding my way along a coast road. And I am also informed that a further extension of the document's validity has been approved, since the issuing of the actual license will take a long time yet. The choked voices of my companions in misfortune, encountered in the course of my waiting in lines, have informed me that there are people who have been without a license for a year, or 2, or even 3. The day before yesterday I affixed the required annual tax stamp to the document. The tobacconist advised me not to cancel it, because if my license were to arrive, I'd have to buy a second stamp. But in not canceling it, I believe, I would be guilty of a crime. At this point, 3 observations must be made. First, I received the temporary document in 2 months, but only because, through a series of privileges I enjoy thanks to my social position and my education, I was able to disturb a series of highly placed persons in 3 cities, 6 public and private institutions, plus a daily paper and a weekly magazine, both distributed and read nationally. If I were a grocer or a clerk, by now I would have had to buy a bicycle. To drive with a real license you have to be Luciano Pavarotti. The second observation is this. The document I preserve jealously in my wallet is of no value and is very easily forged, and the country must therefore be full of drivers in circulation whose identity is difficult to establish. Mass illegality, or mass pretended legality. The third observation requires the reader to concentrate and try to picture an Italian driver's license. Since it no longer arrives in its slipcase, which the driver has to purchase on his own, a license consists of 2 or 3 pages of cheap paper and a photograph. These little booklets are not produced at F.A. Briano, like the volumes of Franco Maria Ricci. They are not hand-bound by skilled craftsmen. They could be printed in any printing shop, of the humblest sort, and from the days of Gutenberg Western civilization has been able to turn out thousands and thousands of such things in a few hours. For that matter, the Chinese had already invented fairly rapid procedures with woodblocks. Would it be so hard to make thousands of these booklets, paste the innocent driver's photograph into them, and distribute them, even by coin-operated machine? What goes on in the maze of the Bureau of Motor Vehicles and the License Office? All of us know that any ordinary terrorist is able to produce, in a few hours, dozens of fake licenses, and remember, it takes more time to produce a fake license than a genuine one. Now, if we don't want citizens who have lost their licenses to start frequenting murky taverns of ill fame in the hope of making contact with the Red Brigades, there is just one solution. Employ all repentant terrorists in the license office. They have the know-how, they have plenty of free time, and work, as is well known, is good for the soul. Thus with one fell swoop we empty many prison cells, we make socially useful people out of former criminals for whom enforced idleness might cause relapses into dangerous fantasies of omnipotence, and we do a service both for the motorized citizen and for the national petroleum industry. But this may all be too simple. If you ask me, in this driver's license business there's the finger of a foreign power. 1982. How to eat in flight. A simple journey by air a few years ago, round trip to Amsterdam, cost me in the end 2 Brooks Brothers neckties, 2 Burberry shirts, 2 pairs of Bardelli slacks, a tweed jacket bought in Bond Street, and a Crizia waistcoat. All international flights observe the commendable ritual of serving a meal. But, as everyone knows, the seats are narrow, the tray likewise, and the ride is sometimes bumpy. Furthermore, the napkins offered by airlines are skimpy and, if you stick one inside your collar, it leaves your abdomen vulnerable, whereas if you unfold one in your lap, your chest is exposed. Common sense would suggest that the food served should be compact, not the kind that make spots. It is unnecessary to resort to vitamin tablets. There are such compact foods as breaded veal cutlet, grilled meat, cheese, French fries, and roast chicken. Spot-making foods include spaghetti with abundant, American-style tomato sauce, eggplant parmesan, pizza straight from the oven, and piping hot consommé in little bowls without handles. Now, a typical in-flight menu comprises some long-cooked meat smothered in brown gravy, generous portions of tomato, vegetables finely chopped and marinated in wine, rice, and peas with sauce. Peas are notoriously elusive. Not even the greatest chefs can produce petits pois farcis, especially if, deferring to the insistence of Miss Manners, the consumer is determined to eat the peas with his fork rather than the more practical spoon. Don't tell me that the Chinese are worse off. I can assure you it is easier to grip a pea with chopsticks than to pierce it with a fork. It is also pointless to rebut that the fork is used to collect the peas, not to pierce them, because forks are designed for the sole purpose of dropping the peas they pretend to collect. Furthermore, peas in flight are duly served only when there is turbulence and the captain turns on the "fasten seatbelts" sign. As a result of this complex ergonomic calculation, the peas have only 2 alternatives. Either they roll down your shirt front or they fall on your fly. As the ancient fabulists taught us, to prevent a fox from drinking out of a glass, the glass must be tall and slim. Glasses on planes are short, squat, rather basin-like. Obviously, any liquid will spill, obeying the laws of physics, even when there is no turbulence. The bread is not a French baguette, which you have to tear with your teeth even when it's fresh, but rather a special friable roll which, the moment it is grasped, explodes in a cloud of fine powder. Thanks to the Lavoisier principle, this powder vanishes only in appearance. On debarking, you will find that it has all accumulated under your behind, managing to stain even the seat of your trousers. The dessert tends to the meringue genre, and its fragments mix with the bread, or else it dribbles over the fingers immediately, when the napkin is already steeped in tomato sauce and hence unusable. True, you still have the perfumed towelette, but this cannot be distinguished from the little envelopes of salt, pepper, and sugar, and so, after you have put the sugar in the salad, the towelette has already ended up in the coffee, which is served boiling hot and in a heat-conducting cup filled to the brim, so that it may readily slip from your seared fingers and blend with the gravy that has now congealed around your waist. In business class, the hostess pours the coffee directly into your lap, hastily apologizing in Esperanto. Airline quartermasters are certainly enlisted from the ranks of those hotel experts who adopt the only type of pot that, instead of pouring the coffee into the cup, scatters 80% of it on the sheet. But why? The most obvious hypothesis is that they want to give the traveler an impression of luxury, and they assume he has in mind those old Hollywood movies where Nero always drinks from broad-brimmed goblets that spatter wine on his beard and his chlamys, or the pictures where a feudal lord gnaws a haunch of meat that smears grease on his lacy shirt, as he embraces a courtesan. But why, then, in first class, where the space is ample, do they serve compact foods, like Russian caviar on buttered slices of toast, or smoked salmon or lobster chunks with a drop of oil and lemon? Is it perhaps because in the films of Luchino Visconti, when the Nazi aristocrats say, "Shoot him," they pop a single, compact grape into their mouth? 1987. How to go through customs. The other night, after an amorous tryst with one of my numerous mistresses, I did away with my partner, bludgeoning her to death with a rare Cellini salt cellar. 1. Was inspired not only by the strict moral code instilled in me since childhood, according to which a woman who indulges in the pleasures of the senses is unworthy of mercy, but also by an aesthetic motive. Namely, to experience the thrill of the perfect crime. I waited, listening to a CD of English Baroque water music, until the corpse was cold and the blood had congealed. Then, with an electric saw, I began dismembering the body, trying at the same time to adhere to certain fundamental anatomical principles, thus paying a tribute to our culture, without which refinement in the social contract would not exist. Finally, I packed the pieces in 2 suitcases of oryx hide, put on a gray suit, and caught the wagon lee for Paris. Once I had handed over my passport and a scrupulous customs declaration to the conductor, listing the few hundred francs I was carrying on my person, I slept like a log, for nothing encourages repose more than the sense of having performed one's duty. Nor did customs venture to disturb a traveler who, merely by purchasing a private berth in first class, asserted ipso facto his membership in the hegemonic class and thus his status as a person above suspicion. The situation was all the more satisfying since, to avoid any withdrawal symptoms, I was carrying with me a trifling amount of morphine, perhaps 800 grams of cocaine, and a canvas by Titian. I will not go into details about how, once in Paris, I rid myself of the wretched remains. I will leave that to your imagination. You can simply go to the Boberg, set your valises on one of its escalators, and years will pass before anyone notices. Or else you can stow them in a niche specially provided for such purposes in the Gare de Lyon. The password-controlled method of unlocking the storage space is so complex that thousands of pieces of luggage lie there and no one ever dares to attempt to retrieve them. But, even more simply, you can sit at a table at the Der Maggots and leave the suitcases outside the Lahoun bookshop. Within minutes they will be stolen, and from then on it's the thief's problem. I cannot deny, however, that the matter left me in a state of tension, which, for that matter, always marks the achievement of an artistically complex and perfect operation. On my return to Italy I felt on edge and so decided to treat myself to a vacation in Locarno. Suffering, through some inexplicable sense of guilt, from a vague fear of being recognized, I decided to travel second class, wearing jeans and a polo shirt with a crocodile logo. At the border I was assailed by vigilant customs officials, who examined my luggage and personal belongings down to the most intimate undergarments, then charged me with clandestine importation into Switzerland of a carton of filter tip MS, and finally they discovered that, behind my sphincter, I had concealed 50 Swiss francs of uncertain provenance, for which I was unable to produce documentation of proper acquisition through a bank. I was subjected to interrogation beneath a naked 1000-watt bulb. I was whipped with a wet towel. I was temporarily held in solitary confinement, chained to my cot in a straitjacket. Luckily, it occurred to me to declare that I had been a member of the underground terrorist group, the Fascist Black Brigades, since its foundation, that I had placed several bombs on express trains for ideological reasons, and that I considered myself a political prisoner. I was promptly assigned to a single room in the welfare center set up in a wing of the Grand Hotel des Isles Borromées. A dietitian advised me to skip a few meals to trim down to ideal weight, while my psychiatrist initiated the process of having my status changed to house arrest, because of certified anorexia. In the meanwhile I wrote some anonymous letters to the courts in the area, insinuating that the judges regularly wrote one another reciprocal threatening anonymous letters, and I denounced the Queen Mother of Great Britain, accusing her of having had active relations with the communist combatant squads. If all goes smoothly, I should be home in a week. 1989. How to travel on American trains. You can undertake an air journey with an ulcer, scabies, housemaid's knee, tennis elbow, shingles, AIDS, galloping consumption, and leprosy. But not with a cold. Anyone who has tried it knows that when the aircraft suddenly descends from 10,000 meters you feel shooting pains in the ear, your head seems about to explode, and you hammer your fists against the window, yelling to be let out, even without a parachute. Well aware of all this but armed with a nasal spray of devastating effect, I resolved to leave for New York, clogged nostrils and all. A mistake. Once on the ground again, I felt as if I were lying in the Philippine Trench. I could see people opening their mouths but I couldn't hear any sound at all. The doctor subsequently explained to me, in sign language, that my tympana were inflamed. He stuffed me with antibiotics and sternly enjoined me not to fly for at least 3 weeks. Since I had to visit 3 different places on the East Coast, I traveled by train. American trains are the image of what the world might be like after an atomic war. It isn't that the trains don't leave, it's that often they don't arrive, having broken down en route, causing people to wait during a 6-hour delay in enormous stations, icy and empty, without a snack bar, inhabited by suspicious characters, and riddled with underground passages that recall the scenes in the New York subways in Return to the Planet of the Apes. The line between New York and Washington, patronized by newspaper reporters and senators, in first class offers at least business class comfort, with a tray of hot food worthy of a university dining hall. But other lines have filthy coaches, with eviscerated leatherette cushions, and the snack bar offers food that makes you nostalgic. You'll say I'm exaggerating. For the recycled sawdust you were forced to eat on the Milan-Rome Express. We see Technicolor films in which ferocious crimes are committed in luxurious sleeping cars, where beautiful white women are served champagne by handsome black waiters who have just stepped out of Gone with the Wind. Lies, all lies. In reality, on American trains the passengers seem to have just stepped out of the Night of the Living Dead, and the conductors proceed with disgust along the aisles, stumbling over Coca-Cola cans, abandoned shopping bags, and sheets of newspaper smeared with the tuna fish salad that erupts from sandwiches when hungry travelers open red-hot plastic containers radiated by microwaves extremely harmful to the genetic patrimony. The train, in America, is not a choice. It is a punishment for having neglected to read Weber on the Protestant ethic and the spirit of capitalism, making the mistake of remaining poor. But liberals are politically correct no matter what, and the conductors are extremely polite even with the dirtiest dropout, naturally I should say, victim of marginalization. In Pennsylvania Station there are many non-travelers wandering around, casting glazed looks at their neighbors' luggage. But the controversy about police brutality in Los Angeles is still in the air, and New York is a PC city. The Irish cop approaches the presumed bum, smiles, and asks him how he happens to be in the neighborhood. The bum appeals to the rights of man, and the cop, remarking angelically that it's a lovely day outside, goes off, dangling, not swinging, his long nightstick. Among the poor, too, there are those who cannot manage to abandon the ultimate symbol of marginalization. They smoke. If you try to climb into the one smoking car, you suddenly find yourself in the Dreigroschenopper. I was the only one wearing a tie. For the rest, catatonic freaks, sleeping tramps snoring with their mouths open, comatose zombies. As the smoker was the last car of the train, on arrival, this collection of outcasts had to walk 100 yards or so, slouching along the platform like Jerry Lewis. Having escaped from this railway hell and changed into uncontaminated clothes, I found myself having supper in the private dining room of a faculty club, among well-dressed professors with educated accents. At the end, I asked if there was somewhere I could go and smoke. A moment of silence and embarrassed smiles followed, then someone closed the doors, a lady extracted a pack of cigarettes from her purse, others looked at my own pack. Furtive glances of complicity, stifled laughter, as in a striptease theater. There followed 10 minutes of delightful, thrilling transgression. I was Lucifer, arrived from the world of shadows, and I illuminated everyone with the blazing torch of sin. 1991. How to take intelligent vacations. It has become a familiar custom, as summer vacation time approaches, for the political and literary weeklies to recommend at least 10 intelligent books that will enable their readers to spend their intelligent vacations intelligently. But thanks to a persistent and unpleasant habit of considering the reader underprivileged and ill-read, some quite celebrated writers take great pains to suggest reading matter that any person of average culture should have read in high school, if not before. It seems to us, if not offensive, at least condescending to insult the reader by advising him to look into, say, the original German edition of the Elective Affinities, the Pleiad Proust, or Petrarch's Latin works. We must bear in mind that, bombarded by so much advice over such a long time, the reader has become more and more demanding. And we must bear in mind those who, unable to afford luxury vacations, are game to venture into experiences as uncomfortable as they are thrilling. For vacationers who will be spending long hours on the beach, I would recommend the Ars Magna Lucis et Umbri of Athanasius Kircher, fascinating for anyone who, lying under the infrared solar rays, wants to reflect on the wonders of light and mirrors. The Roman edition of 1645 can still be acquired through antiquarians for sums undoubtedly inferior to those that our former political leaders exported into Switzerland. I do not advise trying to borrow this book from a library, because it is found only in ancient palaces where the attendants are so elderly that they tend to fall off the ladders leading to the rare bookshelves. Additional drawbacks are the size of the book and the friability of the paper, not to be read on days when the wind is blowing over beach umbrellas. A young person, on the other hand, one who is journeying around the continent on a Eurail pass, and who must therefore read in those overcrowded passages where you have to stand with one arm out of the window, could take with him at least 3 of the 6 Einaudi volumes of Ramusio's Travels, to be read holding one volume in hand, another under an arm, the third clutched between the thighs. Reading about journeys while on a journey is an intensely stimulating experience. For young people who are recovering from, or disappointed by, political activity, but are still anxious to keep an eye on the problems of the Third World, I would suggest some little masterpiece of Muslim wisdom. Adelphi has recently published the Book of Advice by Qaus ibn Iskander, but unfortunately without the original Iranian. The translation does not convey the flavor of the text. I would suggest instead the delightful Kitab al-Sa'ada wa al-Isad by Abu al-Hasan al-Amiri, available in Tehran in the critical edition of 1957. But not every reader is fluent in Middle Eastern languages, of course. For the patristically oriented motorist, less burdened by constraints on bulk or weight of luggage, the complete collection of Min's Petrologia is always an excellent choice. I would advise against the Greek Fathers before the Council of Florence of 1440, which would require packing both the 160 volumes of the Greco-Latin edition and the 81 of the Latin edition, whereas the Latin Fathers prior to 1216 are squeezed into 218 volumes. I am well aware that not all of these are readily available on the market, but the reader can always fall back on photocopies. For those with less specialized interests, I would suggest selected works, in the original, naturally, from the Kabbalistic tradition, essential today for anyone who wants to understand contemporary poetry. A few volumes are enough. A copy of the Sefer Yetzirah, the Zohar, of course, and then Moses Cordovero and Isaac Luria. The Kabbalistic corpus is particularly suited to holidays, because original editions of the oldest works can still be found in scroll editions, easily stowed in hitchhikers' backpacks. The Kabbalistic corpus is also perfectly suited to the club's Mediterranean, where the animators can organize a Kabbalah competition, the prize to be awarded the team constructing the most attractive golem. Finally, for those whose Hebrew is rusty, there is always the Corpus Hermeticum and the Gnostic writings. Valentinus is best. Basil is not infrequently prolix and irritating. All this, and much more, will make for an intelligent vacation. Or, if you want to make things simple, just take with you the Grundries, the Apocryphal Gospels, and microfiches of the unpublished works of Pierce. Or, if you resist intellectual stimulation, stick with Agatha. 1981. How to use the taxi driver. The minute you take your seat in a taxi, the problem of appropriate interaction with the driver arises. The taxi driver is someone who spends all day driving in city traffic, an activity that provokes either heart attack or delirium, in constant conflict with other human drivers. Consequently, he is nervous and hates every anthropomorphic creature. This attitude leads members of the radical chic to say that all taxi drivers are fascists. Not true. The taxi driver has no interest in ideological problems. He hates trade union demonstrations, not for their political orientation, but rather because they block traffic. He would hate a parade of daughters of the Duce just as much. All he wants is a strong government that will send all private car owners to the gallows and establish a reasonable, but strict curfew, between 6 a.m. and midnight, say. He is a misogynist, but only as regards women who move about. If they stay home and cook pasta, he can tolerate them. Italian taxi drivers can be divided into 3 categories. Those who express these opinions throughout the course of the ride. Those who are silent and communicate their misanthropy through their driving. And those who work off their tensions in pure narration, describing what happened to them with this or that fare. These tranches divide lack any allegorical significance, and if they were told in a tavern, the bartender would feel obliged to send the narrator home, saying it was time to go to bed. But to the taxi driver these tales seem odd and surprising, and you would be wise to comment on them with frequent interjections on the order of, "It's a crazy world. There are a lot of flakes out there. You mean they really said that?" This participation does not budge the driver from his fabulatory autism, but it enhances your own self-esteem. An Italian visiting New York runs some risks if, after reading on the driver's ID a name like Desiu Tugnato, Acipazito, Perquaco, he reveals his own nationality. The driver invariably begins speaking a non-existent language, taking deep offense if you don't understand it. You must then immediately say, in English, that you speak only the dialect of your native region. For that matter, he is convinced that in Italy, nowadays, the national language is English. But, generally speaking, New York taxi drivers have either a Jewish name or a non-Jewish name. Those with Jewish names are Zionist reactionaries, those with non-Jewish names are anti-Semitic reactionaries. In either case, they do not make assertions, only pronunciamentos. It is hard to know how to behave with those who have a vaguely Middle Eastern or Russian name, as you can't figure out whether they are Jewish or not. To avoid accidents you must then say you have changed your mind and, instead of the corner of 7th and 14th, you want to go to Charlton Street. The driver will then have a tantrum, slam on the brakes, and make you get out, because New York drivers know only the streets with numbers and not those with names. Paris taxi drivers, on the other hand, do not know any streets at all. If you ask one to take you to place Saint Sulpice, he'll let you off at the Odeon, saying that's the closest he can get. But first he will have moaned at length over your overweening demands with some cries of, "Ah, Carade, Monsieur, alors." If you venture to suggest he consult a guidebook, he either does not reply or suggests that if you wanted bibliographical information you should have consulted an archivist paleographer at the Sorbonne. Asians are a category apart. With extreme politeness they tell you not to worry, they'll find the place at once, and 3 times they make the circuit of the boulevards. Then they ask what's the difference if, instead of taking you to the Gare du Nord, they brought you to the Gare de l'Est. After all, there are plenty of trains at both stations. In New York, as far as I can tell, you can't summon a taxi by telephone to some club. In Paris you can, but they don't come. In Stockholm you can call them only by phone, because they don't trust any old stranger walking along the street. But to discover what phone number to call, you would have to stop a passing taxi, and, as I just said, the drivers don't trust anybody. German drivers are courteous and correct. They don't speak, they just press the accelerator. When you get out, white as a sheet, you realize why they come to Italy for relaxation and drive in front of you, doing 60 kilometers per hour in the fast lane. If you set a Frankfurt driver in his Porsche to compete with a Rio driver in his battered Volkswagen, the Rio driver would arrive first, partly because he doesn't stop at traffic lights. If he did, he would see another battered Volkswagen pull up beside him, full with boys just waiting to reach out and snatch his passenger's wristwatch. In any part of the world there is one sure way of recognizing a taxi driver. He is that person who never has any change. 1988. How not to talk about soccer. I have nothing against soccer. I don't go to stadiums, for the same reason that I wouldn't go and spend a night in the basement of the main railroad station in Milan, or stroll in Central Park in New York after 6 in the afternoon. But if the occasion arises I watch a good game on TV with interest and pleasure, because I recognize and appreciate all the merits of this noble sport. I don't hate soccer. I hate soccer fans. Please don't misunderstand me. My feelings towards fans are exactly those that xenophobes of the Lombard League feel towards immigrants from the Third World. I'm not a racist, so long as they stay home. By home, here I mean both the places where they like to gather during the week, bars, living rooms, clubs, and the stadiums, where I am not interested in what happens. And for me it's a plus if the Liverpool fans arrive, because then I can amuse myself reading the news reports. If we must have CIR senses, some blood at least should be spilled. I don't like the soccer fan, because he has a strange defect. He cannot understand why you are not a fan yourself, and he insists on talking to you as if you were. To convey my meaning I will give you an analogy. I play the recorder, worse and worse, according to a public statement by Luciano Berio, but to be followed so closely by a great master is a satisfaction. Now let's suppose that I am in a train compartment and, to strike up a conversation, I ask the gentleman sitting opposite me, have you heard Franz Bruggen's latest CD? What? I'm talking about the Pavane Lac Brimy. If you ask me, he takes the opening bars too slowly. I'm afraid I don't understand. I'm talking about Van Eyck, of course, slowly and distinctly, the blockflute. Look, I'm not. Do you play it with a bow? Oh, I understand, you aren't. No, that's funny. Did you know that, for a custom-made Kulsma, there's a 3-year waiting list? So an ebony moke is better. It's the best, at least of those on the market. Galway says the same thing. Tell me something. Do you go as far as the 5th variation of Deirdre Dún Daphne de Ver? Actually, I'm getting off at Parma. Oh, I see. You prefer to play in F rather than in C. It's more satisfying in some ways, I know. Mind you, I've discovered a sonata by Loewe that lay who, but I'd like to hear you in the fantasias of Telemann. Can you manage them? Don't tell me you use the German fingering? Look, when it comes to the Germans, granted, the BMW is a great car, and I respect them, but I get it, you use the Baroque fingering. Right, though the St. Martin's in the Fields bunch. There, you understand my point, I'm sure. And you will sympathize with my hapless traveling companion if he pulls the alarm cord. But the same thing happens with the soccer fan. And the situation is particularly difficult when the fan is also your taxi driver. So what about Viola, I must have missed that. But you're going to watch the game tonight, aren't you? No, I have to work on Book Z of the Metaphysics, you know? The Staggerite. Okay, you watch it and you'll see if I'm right or not. I say Van Basten might be the new Maradona. What do you think? But I'd keep an eye on Aldays, all the same. And so on and on. Like talking to a wall. It isn't that he doesn't care a fig that don't care a fig. It's that he can't conceive that anyone could exist and not care a fig. He wouldn't understand it even if I had 3 eyes and a pair of antennae emerging from the green scales of my nape. He has no notion of the diversity, the variety, the incomparability of the various possible worlds. I have used the taxi driver as an example, but the situation is the same when the interlocutor belongs to the managerial class. It's like ulcers, they strike rich and poor alike. It is curious, however, that creatures so adamantine in their conviction that all humans are the same are ready to bash in the head of the fan who comes from the neighboring province. This ecumenical chauvinism wrings roars of admiration from me. It's as if the members of the Lombard League were to say, "Suffer the Africans to come unto us, so we can kick their ass." 1990. How to use the coffee pot from hell. There are several ways to prepare good coffee. There is the Café alla Napolitana, the Café Espresso, Café Turk, Cafezino do Brasil, French Café Filter, American coffee. Each coffee, in its own way, is excellent. American coffee can be a pale solution served at a temperature of 100 degrees centigrade in plastic thermos cups, usually obligatory in railroad stations for purposes of genocide, whereas coffee made with an American percolator, such as you find in private houses or in humble luncheonettes, served with eggs and bacon, is delicious, fragrant, goes down like pure spring water, and afterwards causes severe palpitations, because 1 cup contains more caffeine than 4 espressos. Swill coffee is something apart. It is usually made from rotten barley, dead men's bones, plus a few genuine coffee beans fished out of the garbage bins of a Celtic dispensary. It is easily recognized by its unmistakable odor of feet marinated in dishwater. It is served in prisons, reform schools, sleeping cars, and luxury hotels. Of course, if you stay at the Plaza Majestic, at the Maria Giolanda in Brabante, at the Des Alpes et des Bains, you can actually order an espresso, but when it arrives in your room it is almost covered by a sheet of ice. To avoid this mishap you ask instead for the continental breakfast, and you lie back, prepared to savor the pleasure of having the day's first meal in bed. The continental breakfast consists of 2 rolls, 1 croissant, orange juice, in homeopathic measure, a curl of butter, a little pot of blueberry preserve, another of honey, and 1 of apricot jam, a jug of milk, now cold, a bill totaling 100,000 lire, and a devilish pot full of swill. The pots used by normal people, or the good old coffee makers from which you pour the fragrant beverage directly into the cup, allow the coffee to descend through a narrow nozzle or beak, whereas the upper part includes some safety device that keeps the lid closed. The Grand Hotel in Wagenlee swill arrives in a pot with a very wide beak, like a deformed pelican's, and with an extremely mobile lid, so devised that, drawn by an irrepressible horror vacui, it slides automatically downwards when the pot is tilted. These 2 devices allow the hellish pot to pour half the coffee immediately onto the rolls and jam and then, thanks to the sliding lid, to scatter the rest over the sheets. In sleeping cars the pots can be of cheaper manufacture, because the movement of the train itself assists in the scattering of the coffee. In hotels, on the other hand, the pot must be of china to make the sliding of the lid easier, but still devastating. As to the origin and purpose of the coffee pot from hell, there are 2 schools of thought. The school of Freiburg asserts that this device allows the hotel to demonstrate, with fresh sheets, that your bed has been duly remade. The school of Bratislava insists that the motivation is moralistic, cf. Max Weber, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Catholicism. The hellish coffee pot prevents any lazing in bed because it is very uncomfortable to eat a brioche, already steeped in coffee, when you are wrapped in coffee-soaked sheets. The hellish coffee pot is not for sale to individuals, but is produced exclusively for the great hotel chains and for the Wagenlee Company. Nor is it used in prisons, where the swill is served in mess tins, because sheets soaked in coffee would be harder to detect in the darkness if knotted together for purposes of escape. The Freiburg school suggests having the waiter set the breakfast tray on the table and not on the bed. The Bratislava school responds that this indisputably avoids the pouring of coffee on the sheets, but not its spilling over the edge of the tray and soiling the pajamas. The hotel does not provide a new pair daily, and, in any case, pajamas or not, coffee taken at the table falls straight on the abdomen and the genitals, producing burns where they would not be advisable. To this objection the Freiburg school replies with a shrug, and, frankly, this answer is unsatisfactory. 1988. How to react to familiar faces. A few months ago, as I was strolling in New York, I saw, at a distance, a man I knew very well heading in my direction. The trouble was that I couldn't remember his name or where I had met him. This is one of those sensations you encounter especially when, in a foreign city, you run into someone you met back home, or vice versa. A face out of context creates confusion. Still, that face was so familiar that, I felt, I should certainly stop, greet him, converse. Perhaps he would immediately respond, "My dear Umberto, how are you?" Or even, "Were you able to do that thing you were telling me about?" And I would be at a total loss. It was too late to flee. He was still looking at the opposite side of the street, but now he was beginning to turn his eyes towards me. I might as well make the first move. I would wave and then, from his voice, his first remarks, I would try to guess his identity. We were now only a few feet from each other. I was just about to break into a broad, radiant smile, when suddenly I recognized him. It was Anthony Quinn. Naturally, I had never met him in my life, nor he me. In a thousandth of a second I was able to check myself, and I walked past him, my eyes staring into space. Afterwards, reflecting on this incident, I realized how totally normal it was. Once before, in a restaurant, I had glimpsed Charlton Heston and had felt an impulse to say hello. These faces inhabit our memory. Watching the screen, we spend so many hours with them that they are as familiar to us as our relatives, even more so. You can be a student of mass communication, debate the effects of reality or the confusion between the real and the imagined, and expound the way some people fall permanently into this confusion. But still you are not immune to the syndrome. And there is worse. I have received confidences from people who, appearing fairly frequently on TV, have been subjected to the mass media over a certain period of time. I'm not talking about Johnny Carson or Oprah Winfrey, but public figures, experts who have participated in panel discussions often enough to become recognizable. All of them complain of the same disagreeable experience. Now, as a rule, when we see someone we don't know personally, we don't stare into his or her face at length, we don't point out the person to the friend at our side, we don't speak of this person in a loud voice when he or she can overhear. Such behavior would be rude, even, if carried too far, aggressive. But the same people who would never point to a customer at a counter and remark to a friend that the man is wearing a smart tie behave quite differently with famous faces. My guinea pigs insist that, at a newsstand, in the tobacconist's, as they are boarding a train or entering a restaurant toilet, they encounter others who, among themselves, say aloud, "Look, there's X." "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. It's X, I tell you." And they continue their conversation amiably, while X hears them, and they don't care if he hears them. It's as if he didn't exist. Such people are confused by the fact that a protagonist of the mass media's imaginary world should abruptly enter real life, but at the same time they behave in the presence of the real person as if he still belonged to the world of images, as if he were on a screen, or in a weekly picture magazine. As if they were speaking in his absence. I might as well have grabbed Anthony Quinn by the lapel, dragged him to a phone booth, and called a friend to say, "Talk about coincidence. I've run into Anthony Quinn. And you know something? He seems real." After which I would throw Quinn aside and go on about my business. The mass media first convinced us that the imaginary was real, and now they're convincing us that the real is imaginary. And the more reality the TV screen shows us, the more cinematic our everyday world becomes. Until, as certain philosophers have insisted, we will think that we are alone in the world, and that everything else is the film that God or some evil spirit is projecting before our eyes. 1989. How to be a TV host. Some time ago, I enjoyed a fascinating experience in the Svalbard Islands, when the local Academy of Sciences invited me to spend several years there studying the Bonga Nation, a society that flourishes in an area between Terra Incognita and the Isles of the Blessed. The Bongas' activities are more or less the same as our own, but they have an unusual insistence on the explicit, the declarative. They ignore the art of the implicit, the taken for granted. For example, if we now begin to talk, obviously we use words, but we feel no need to say so. A Bonga, on the contrary, in speaking to another Bonga, begins by saying, "Pay attention. I am now speaking and I will use some words." We build houses and then, with the exception of the Japanese, we indicate to possible visitors the street, the number, the name of the occupant. The Bongas write, "House," on every house, and "door," beside the door. If you ring a Bonga gentleman's bell, he will open the door, saying, "Now I am opening the door," and then introduce himself. If he invites you to dinner, he will show you to a chair with the words, "This is the table, and these are the chairs." Then, in a triumphant tone, he announces, "And now, the maid. Here is Rosina. She will ask you what you want and will serve you your favorite dish." The procedure is the same in restaurants. It is strange to observe the Bongas when they go to the theater. As the house lights go down, an actor appears and says, "Here is the curtain." Then the curtain parts and other actors enter, to perform, say, Hamlet or La Malade Imaginaire. But each actor is introduced to the audience, first with his real first and last names, then with the name of the character he is to play. When an actor has finished speaking, he announces, "Now, a moment of silence." Some seconds go by, and then the next actor starts speaking. Needless to say, at the end of the first act, one of the players comes to the footlights to inform everyone that there will now be an intermission. What particularly impressed me was the fact that their musical shows consist, as ours do, of spoken skits, songs, duets, and dances. But in our country I was accustomed to the idea that two comedians first do their skit, then one begins to sing a song, then both exit as some pretty girls trip on stage and begin a dance, to give the spectator a bit of relief. Finally, the dance ends, and the actors return. In the Bonga Theater, however, first the actors announce that a comic skit will now be seen, then they say they will now sing a duet, indicating that it will be humorous, and finally the last actor on stage announces, "Now the dance." The thing that most amazed me was not that, during the intermission, some advertising slogans appeared on the curtain. They do this in our theaters, but that, after announcing the intermission, the actor duly added, "And now, commercials." For a long time I wondered what drove the Bongas to this obsessive clarification. Perhaps, I said to myself, they are somewhat slow-witted, and if a person doesn't say, "I'm going now," they don't realize that the person is saying goodbye. And to some extent this must have been the case. But there was another reason. The Bongas are performance worshippers, and therefore they have to transform everything, even the implicit, into performance. During my stay among the Bongas I also had the opportunity of reconstructing the history of applause. In ancient times, the Bongas applauded for two reasons, either because they were happy with a good performance, or because they wanted to honor some person of great merit. The duration of the applause indicated who was most appreciated and most loved. Again, in the past, wily impresarios, to convince audiences of a production's worth, stationed in the house some ruffians paid to applaud even when there was no motive. When television shows were first broadcast in Bonga, the producers lured relatives of the organizers into the studio and, thanks to a flashing light, invisible to TV viewers at home, alerted them when they were to applaud. In no time the viewers discovered the trick, but, while in our country such applause would have immediately been discredited, it was not so for the Bongas. The home audience began to want to join in the applause too, and hordes of Bonga citizens turned up of their own free will in the country's TV studios, ready to pay for the privilege of clapping. Some of these enthusiasts enrolled in special applause classes. And since at this point everything was in the open, it was the host himself who said, in a loud voice at the appropriate moments, "And now let's hear a good round of applause." But soon the studio audience began applauding without any urging from the host. He had simply to question someone in the crowd, asking him, for example, what he did for a living, and when he replied, "I'm in charge of the gas chamber at the city dog pound," his words were greeted by a resounding ovation. This used to happen occasionally in the West, as when Bob Hope appeared and, before he could open his mouth to say hello, frenzied applause was already heard in the house. Or a host would say, "Here we are again, folks, like every Thursday," and the public would not only applaud, but split its sides. Applause became so indispensable that even during the commercials, when the salesman would say, "Buy Pip Slimming tablets," oceanic applause would be heard. The viewers knew very well that there was no one in the studio with the salesman, but the applause was necessary, otherwise the program would have seemed contrived, and the viewers would switch channels. The Bongas want television to show them real life, as it is lived, without pretense. The applause comes from the audience, which is like us, not from the actor, who is pretending, and it is therefore the only guarantee that television is a window open on the world. The Bongas are currently preparing a program created entirely by actors applauding. It will be entitled Telly Truth. In order to feel that their feet are firmly on the ground, the Bongas now applaud all the time, even when they are not watching TV. They applaud at funerals, not because they are pleased or because they want to please the dear departed, but so as not to feel like shadows among other shadows, to make sure they are alive and real, like the images they see on the tiny screen. One day I was visiting a Bonga house when a relative entered, saying, "Granny was just run over by a truck." The others all sprang to their feet and clapped wildly. I cannot say that the Bongas are our inferiors. Indeed, one of them told me that they plan to conquer the world. And this idea is not entirely platonic, as I realized when I came home. That evening I turned on the TV and I saw a host introducing the girls who assisted him, then announcing that he would do a comic monologue, and concluding with, "And now our ballet." A distinguished gentleman, debating grave political problems with another distinguished gentleman, at a certain point broke off to say, "And now, a break for the commercials." Some entertainers even introduced the audience. Others, the camera that was filming them. Everyone applauded. Distressed, I left the house and went to a restaurant famous for its nouvelle cuisine. The waiter arrived, bringing me 3 leaves of lettuce. And he said, "This is our Macédoine of Late Lombard, dotted with rughetta from Piedmont, finely chopped and dressed with sea salt, marinated in the balsamic vinegar of the house, anointed with first-pressing virgin olive oil from Umbria." 1987. How not to know the time. The watch whose description I am reading, Patek Philippe Caliber 89, is a pocket watch, a double case in 18-karat gold, endowed with 33 functions. The magazine article introducing the watch does not indicate the price, I suppose because of lack of space, though it would suffice to indicate the number of billions without printing all the zeros. Seized by a profound frustration, I went out and bought myself a new Casio for 50,000 lire, just as all those who feel a mad desire for a Ferrari go out and calm themselves by purchasing at least a car radio. Anyway, to carry a pocket watch, I would have to buy an appropriate waistcoat as well. Or, I told myself, I could keep it on the table. I would spend hours and hours knowing the day, the week, the month, the year, the decade, the century, the year's position in the leap year cycle, hour, minute, and second of daylight saving time, hour, minute, and second in the time zone of my choice, temperature, sidereal time, moon phase, time of dawn and time of sunset, equation of time, position of the sun in the zodiac, not to mention the fun I could have shuddering at the infinity of the complete and mobile depiction of the stellar map, or pressing the stop button at the various dials of the chronograph and the tachometer, or deciding when I should rest a moment and relax in the assurance of the built-in alarm. I was forgetting. A special indicator would show how much power remained. And still another thing. If I wanted, I could also know the exact time. But why should I? If I were to possess this miracle, I would have no interest in knowing that it is 10 minutes past 10. On the contrary, I would observe the rise and the setting of the sun, and I could do this even in a darkened room. I would learn the temperature. I would cast horoscopes. I would dream in the daytime of the blue dial where I could see the stars at night, but I would spend the night meditating on the time remaining before Easter. With such a watch, it is no longer necessary to bother about external time, because that would become our sole concern for all our lives. And the time the watch narrates would be, not the immobile reflection of eternity, but eternity in progress. In other words, time would be only a fabled hallucination produced by that magic mirror. I raise these issues because, for a while now, there have been magazines available devoted to collectible watches, rather expensive magazines printed on shiny paper with full-color pages, and I wonder whether they are bought only by readers who leaf through them as though they were volumes of fairy tales, or whether the publications are addressed to a public of serious purchasers, as I sometimes suspect. This would mean that the more the mechanical watch, miracle of centuries of experience, becomes useless, the stronger and more widespread is the desire to display, to regard fondly, to cherish as an investment, these wondrous and perfect time machines. It is obvious that these machines are not designed to communicate the fleeting hour. The abundance of functions and their elegant distribution over numerous and symmetrical dials mean that, to learn that it is 20 past 3 on Friday, May 24th, you have to shift your eyes at some length, following the movement of numerous hands, as, in sequence, you record the information in a notebook. For that matter, the envious Japanese electronics experts, now ashamed of their former practicality, have come out with promises of microscopic dials that will display barometric pressure, altitude, ocean depth, countdown timing, and temperature, not to mention, of course, data bank, telemetric time indicator, 8 alarms, money changing calculator, and hour signal. All these clocks, like the whole information industry today, run the risk of no longer communicating anything because they tell too much. But they also possess another characteristic of the information industry: they no longer speak of anything except themselves and their internal functioning. The zenith is reached in some ladies' watches with imperceptible hands, just a marble face without hours or minutes, shaped in such a way that, at most, you could say we are somewhere between noon and midnight, and perhaps it's the day before yesterday. Anyway, as the designer hints, what else do the ladies for whom the watch is meant have to do, except look at a device that narrates its own vanity? 1988. Stars and Stripes. ASTROGRAM. From GHQ, Galactic Core, Sol 3. 2. Army Command Zone IV, Uranus. Per information received, flagrant episodes homosexuality observed, booze first assault force stop, all responsible must be immediately eliminated, stop strict repression urgentist stop. Signed, General PERCUOCO, CIC, Casino, Monaco. Asterisk. ASTROGRAM. From Army Command Zone IV, Uranus. 2. GHQ, Galactic Core, Sol 3. Casino, Monaco. Respectfully inform GHQ that booze, natives of Uranus, are hermaphrodite race, no. 30,015. Intergalactic Ethnic Registry, stop presumed instances homosexuality as per documents submitted herewith or hence normal established sexual practice contemplated in Uranus Legal Code and Intergalactic Constitution, stop. Signed, Colonel ZBZZTSG, Acting Commander during absence, General AGWRSS on maternity leave. Asterisk. ASTROGRAM. From GHQ, Galactic Core, Sol 3. 2. Army HQ, Zone V. Pluto. This GHQ reliably informed of flagrant episodes public masturbation among diggers and drillers. Core Pluto stop insist on immediate exemplary punishment of those directly involved, including officers responsible for inexcusable laxity of discipline. Signed, General PERCUOCO, CIC, Casino. Asterisk. ASTROGRAM. From Army HQ, Zone V, Pluto. 2. GHQ, Galactic Core, Sol 3. Casino, Monaco. Clarification necessary. Stop Pluto drillers members Vermi. Form race, hence boring skills and exceptional productivity. Geological prospecting. Pluto zone, reproduce via parthenogenesis. Stop in characteristic driller position. Anterior extremity sucks posterior extremity producing symptomatic orgasm and subsequent scission. Stop normal procedure contemplated in local army regulations, otherwise further recruitment impossible. Signed, General Busameth and General Busameth. Request confirmation commander identity after recent top-level scission. Asterisk. ASTROGRAM. From GHQ, Galactic Core, Sol 3. 2. Army HQ, Zone IV, Uranus. And Army HQ, Zone V. Asterisk. ASTROGRAM. From GHQ, Galactic Core, Sol 3. 2. Army HQ, Zone IV, Uranus. And Army HQ, Zone V, Pluto. Specious excuses unacceptable. Stop excessive laxity undermining galactic forces. Strict traditional morality, quick thinking and scrupulous hygiene. Also proud tradition. Marine Corps, Royal Carabiniers, Grenadier Guards submitting mass resignations. Stop all offenders confined to quarters. Signed, General Percuoco. CIC, Casino. Asterisk. Intergalactic Commission for Defense of Ethnic Minorities. Fomalaut Piscis Australis. Your Excellency, I am taking the liberty of drawing to your attention the episodes referred to in the enclosed file, which clearly suggests that General Percuoco, a terrestrial, I presume, brings to the Galactic Military Administration a mindset I would say has been obsolete at least since the administration of President Flanagan, who, before his unfortunate assassination by an African fanatic, so intelligently defended the rights of marginal races to total equality. As you well know, the Flanagan Doctrine decrees that all galactic beings are equal before the Great Matrix, irrespective of shape, number of scales or limbs, or even the physical state, solid, liquid, or gaseous, in which they happen to exist. The intergalactic federal government has rightly established a High Commission for Cultural and Biological Relativity, which produces the Intergalactic Ethnic Registry and proposes to the High Court of Justice suitable additions and emendations to the intergalactic laws as terrestrial civilization expands to the farthest extremes of the cosmos. After the fall of the great atomic empires, the former Russia and America, when the peoples of the Mediterranean basin, thanks to the discovery of the energy-generating capacity of citric acid, became masters, first of Earth, and then of the entire universe, crisscrossing it with their astrocraft propelled by what a poet had extolled as the golden trumpets of solar ity, it seemed to all a good omen that dominion over the universe had been given to peoples who had previously suffered severe racial discrimination on their own planet. You surely recall the enthusiasm that greeted the Hefner Law, which allowed copulation between terrestrial women and the pentaphilic men of Jupiter, even though we all know the cost in bloodshed of this ill-starred pioneering experiment, which required the no doubt over-vigorous males of Jupiter to satisfy 5 simultaneous urges in conjunction with a single univaginal female. But that undeniable breakthrough nevertheless inspired the intergalactic interracial laws that continue today to be the boast of our Federation. It is a source of great general satisfaction, too, that our intergalactic military regulations have conformed to the principle of integration and, in fact, have established the principle that citizens should fulfill their military service requirement on a planet other than the one of their birth. We have noticed with great dismay, therefore, that this regulation has for a long time been flouted, as is evidenced by the fact that, like the drillers of Pluto, who serve today only on their native planet, the Booz attack force serves only on Uranus. This situation explains why General Percuoco, whose military and management skills are naturally beyond debate, is unaware of the anatomical details and reproductive methods of these troops. But Your Excellency can assess the enormity of this diplomatic incident from the television coverage of the consequent uprisings on the two planets involved. I therefore beg Your Excellency to take measures to ensure the implementation of the intergalactic principle of integration, and I am confident that from the splendid heights of the Moyenne Corniche, and from the presidential residence, the Palais La Turbie, which affords Your Excellency such an enchanting view of the Mediterranean, a prompt and paternal admonition will be sent to the military command that from the historic palace of the former Casino of Monte Carlo presides over the galactic maneuvers, the all-important conflictual potlatch. I beg you to consider me your most devoted subject, and in the name of the great combinatory matrix of the universe I bend my 30 knees. Avram Boone Sib. Asterisk.